Hi, I'm Aaron Schutze. I'm Director of Research with Topple, and today I'm going to be sharing part 4 in a series of talks about Taktikos. And previously, we've talked about some aspects of the security properties of Taktikos in the context of uh, network delay, adversaries that are trying to bias the network in their favor somehow, and grinding attacks, things of that nature. So today we're going to be focusing on network delay, and in particular, a close trade-off between the security of the protocol and the network delay that's encountered by honest participants on the network. So I'm going to be kind of giving a bit of a live demo of a numerical model as well. And so I'll go through the slides and talk about how this kind of numerical model is set up, what are the ingredients, and what are the kind of metrics that we're getting out of it, and try and gain some intuition about what the plots that we're going to be looking at. So we're thinking about the consistency properties. And when I say blockchain consistency, that means that anybody participating in the protocol will eventually have some consistent view of the blocks on the blockchain. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slides. And the kind of the title of this talk is Network Delay and Transaction Settlement. So transaction settlement has kind of an interplay between the delay that's experienced on the network and the chain growth. And there's a trade-off between chain growth, network delay, and then how fast we can consider a block to be settled on a blockchain. So outlining this, we're going to look at the kind of properties of network delay in this semi-synchronous setting. And when I say semi-synchronous, it's a model to model the security properties in the context of a delaying adversary who's trying to launch a covert attack. And we're going to look at the interplay between the rates of chain growth that we get versus this delay parameter. So we're thinking of this in terms of one parameter kind of delay model. And we'll calculate the consistency bounds for Taktikos, which gives us a measure and a bearing on the security properties relative to other protocols. And we can compare these consistency bounds that we get with the consistency bounds of a proof of work protocol that we're kind of interested in kind of comparing as a lens of baseline of comparison. And then finally, we'll look at these probabilities of settlement violations, this settlement probabilities. It gives you what assurance that a block is going to be persistent on the blockchain or part of the canonical chain of the blockchain. Now, the kind of trade-off here is between security and speed, and we're trying to optimize the protocol to be as fast and resilient as possible in the face of network delay. And in probabilistic consensus, where the probability of the next block to arise on the network is proportionate to the resources involved that lend to block creation, we have a situation where if we increase the rate of chain growth, then that means that unsynchronized parties will produce forks at a higher rate, along with a higher rate of chain growth for the main chain. So it simultaneously increases the chain growth of all forks. And when the system encounters a network delay, then the number of forks increases as the chain growth increases. So the number of forks is kind of proportionate to the security measure. So the rate of forks has to be kept low to keep the security high. But that means we have to keep the speed low in order to reduce the amount of forks. And we'll see that Taktikos actually allows us to increase chain growth without making as much of a security trade-off. And we can optimize for speed and security simultaneously, which hopefully will allow us to, and we'll see, increase the scale of participation by improving the settlement properties. Now, the semi-synchronous setting, you'll recall from the last few talks that we had, which kind of reminded this picture of the probability distribution of time intervals. And the probability distribution of time intervals gives us the block frequency. And we're kind of have this distribution that has a byte taken out of it relative to a distribution that's unaffected to with respect to network delay. So an adversary has this distribution of block time intervals, and an honest participant would see this distribution of block time intervals if they had the same amount of resources. So these kind of time intervals distributions with delay that have this discontinuity in it, and this kind of lower proportion of low block time intervals, that we're kind of left with this situation where the honest participants are at a natural disadvantage relative to an adversary, which is able to make a faster rate of chain growth with respect to honest participants. And the way of treating this in the security setting of the semi-synchronous setting has been paved by the analysis that went into the Ouroboros-Prowse protocol. And they have this analysis framework which uses characteristic strings, a kind of combinatorial way of cataloging the leader election events and counting the number of forks that occur due to this network delay model. And this reduction map technique is also deployed, which reduces this semi-synchronous model to a synchronous setting where you're modeling the forks as if they're induced by some kind of hypothetical adversary that's able to fork the network with respect to delay. So that self-contained analysis kind of serves as a basis for understanding Taktikos, since we're inheriting a lot of the security properties and the staking procedure of Prowse along the way. We're modifying the staking procedure of Prowse to introduce the difficulty curve, and this kind of modification that we're introducing in Taktikos complicates things because we have these conditional eligibilities. So it makes it more non-trivial to actually convey how many forks are the adversary is able to, or calculate the number of forks the adversary is able to make in a given time frame. So what we can do is design the difficulty curve, and this is the staking procedure of Prowse enhanced to add a difficulty curve. And the staking procedure of Prowse in this context would be a constant difficulty curve, but we're taking all these kind of ingredients of chain selection, leader election, and eligibilities from Ouroboros-Prowse, incorporating the difficulty curve with the staking threshold function, and saying that, okay, this eligible VRF nonces have to satisfy this staking threshold function that is a function of the slot interval. And recall that the slot interval is the length of time in discrete units of slots between a block and its parent block. So we're gauging eligibility based on the spacing between blocks in time. And we can modulate the eligibility in time with this mechanism. And this staking threshold function is chosen in particular to satisfy this constraint of independent aggregation, which ensures that there's no, it mitigates grinding advantage and also helps in the analysis in that we're able to model the rate of chain growth from a distribution of parties in a really efficient way. This equality here corresponds to a constraint that we use in the probabilistic analysis. It says, oh, the rate of chain growth is independent of how stake is allocated across all of these parties. So it's as if all the stake is accumulated into one count and coming from one source. And then combined with the previously established combinatorial framework of forkable strings, we can count the forks that are induced in a delay setting simply by having the appropriate Markov chain representation. So designing a difficulty curve is somewhat up to interpretation, but we have an approach and a particular parameterization which gives nice security properties and gives good chain growth properties. And there's really no other reason to choose it other than that. It's actually a class of many different types of difficulty curves that are represented in one kind of parametric setup. And we choose this parameterization so that it has these kind of features that have intuitive chain growth properties. And intuitively, we expect one block per forging window interval. And that's just kind of how it happens that the distributions of chain growth end up looking with respect to a given difficulty curve. And we'll see what those probability distributions look like with the numerical model. So we introduce a slot gap, which is kind of meant to space out blocks. So blocks that are too close together won't be eligible. We have a cutoff, which aids the analysis and helps us impose this recovery phase. And the recovery phase corresponds to a reduced rate of chain growth that unsynchronized parties would seek out eligibilities at. So this kind of lower difficulty curve, the lower the difficulty curve, the higher the block difficulty. So this difficulty curve increasing means that blocks are getting easier and easier to forge. And then when it decreases at this cutoff, they become more difficult to forge. So that's kind of how this, what we're calling the snowplow curve, is intuitively put together. But it's just one way of parameterizing and the space of possible difficulty curves. So we have been exploring this for the numerical model, and we've come up with Markov chain representation. So we can design our difficulty curve, predict the block frequency, and then in turn predict the security properties of the protocol. So with this, with this model of Markov chain representation, where the discrete slot interval states are represented on an axis here, and then the state transitions are represented by the arrows. These perp symbols correspond to empty slots. So every time a leader election event produces no eligibilities, we transition in this fashion or along these paths up to the recovery phase state. And this is why we call it the recovery phase, because we have this kind of recurrence relation. We have a recurrence, time recurrence Markov chain with a state that kind of loops on itself at the end. So this kind of recurrence chain is truncated by this recovery phase state. So the system replenishes itself eventually and goes back to the initial delta equals 1 state where a block was just produced. So every time a block's produced, we go back to this replenishing state. And every time a block, and every time there's a space between a block, we increment along this delta axis. So that's the recurrence time chain. And we represent the transition probabilities with respect to the difficulty curve and with this transition matrix, which allows us to calculate the stationary distribution of this Markov chain. And that's how we're calculating the block frequency in these models. So block frequency is a kind of analytically predictable quantity, and we can predict the quantity and compare with our previous numerical results from the grinding simulations. So we have these two distinct approaches where we can compare the grinding simulations with our Markov chain analysis, and we get really good agreement between the two. So omega sub g is the true block frequency that an adversary would be able to produce if they're forging nothing at stake and forging on every possible eligibility that they had locally. And we have omega sub g for a couple of different branch depths, and the branch depth is corresponding to the number of generations that an adversary kind of tracks in their private reserve of eligibilities. And omega sub g is approximately equal as long as d is equal to 2 or greater. And so these, you can see there's kind of good agreement between all three of these trends, but the blue trend follows the green analytic prediction for the block frequency. So block frequency on this axis, relative stake on this axis. We're using R to denote relative stake in this context. And notice that the frequency itself is nonlinear with respect to R. Whereas in a setting such as the one with proof of work, in a proof of work setting where the resource is compute power, the trend is linear. So we're kind of interested in comparing this nonlinear trend with a linear trend in the numerical model. Now the degree to which this trend is nonlinear kind of guides us in how we want to design the difficulty curve as well. So this kind of picture of block frequency with respect to a covert adversary allows us to analyze the rates of chain growth with respect to network delay. And we're interested in this domain of security where the block frequency of the honest participants is greater than the block frequency of the adversarial participants. And we're using script H and script A to represent adversarial players and honest players, respectively. Or I got that backwards. So honest is H, adversary is A, right? So we're using our difficulty curve to calculate the block frequency with respect to how much of the adversary stake is controlled by the adversary. How much stake is controlled by the adversary in this context? So along this axis is the adversarial fraction of relative stake, and the other point, the delay equals 0 trend corresponds to an honest participant who has an amount of stake that the covert adversary doesn't have. So their net relative stake adds to 1 across the board. But here we're just giving some proportion of, at this point, say the adversary has 20% of the stake and the honest participants would have 80% of the stake. So clearly 80% of the stake is going to outgrow and outpace the honest participants, whereas they would only have approximately 20% of the chain growth. And now notice that this line, this blue trend and the red trend are anti-symmetric with respect to one another at this intersection point. So that applies to a consistency bound that's at 50%. And notice that as we increase the delay with respect to the slots in the system, now we're like measuring delay in terms of slots. A delay of 0 produces a symmetric one with a 50% consistency bound. But notice that the intersection point changes as you change the delay, and that the intersection point moves with respect to the halfway point, and it gets lower and lower. So the adversary fraction that's required to overtake the honest participants becomes less and less as the network delay increases. So this is the primary kind of security trade-off between network delay and blockchain security. And that the more delay there is, the less guarantee, the less kind of assurance you have of the blockchain becoming consistent in the future. And we're talking about the asymptotic security properties in this context, the probabilistic security properties. So as long as the honest trend is overtaking the adversarial trend, then we have an assurance that eventually the honest chain will outgrow the adversarial chain that's being mined in private. But if the adversary chain growth is greater than the honest participants, then we're in a domain of that there's no consistency. So that's why it's called the consistency bound. Now, and the punchline here is, the delay reduces honest chain growth while leaving this adversarial chain growth unaffected. And we have this consistency bound that acts as kind of a defining point of where the security of the blockchain can be guaranteed. Now, we're interested in comparing this consistency bound result on an axis with respect to the delay. So on the previous slide, we had this intersection point that's being kind of traced out by this trend that's altering the delay. And now we're altering delay along this axis. So this is the rate of chain growth times the delay interval. So the blocks per delay. And this consistency bound is plotted. And notice at delay 0, we start at a 50% consistency bound at 0.5. And as delay increases, our consistency bound reduces. And what this corresponds to is this intersection point reducing towards 0 on the adversary fraction as the delay increases. So that's the kind of scaling law that we expect. That's a scaling law that was derived in this analysis that takes a similar approach to modeling proof of work. But what they do is this in GKR20, they analyze the consistency properties of proof of work chains in this discrete time setting. And in this discrete time setting, in fact, they're even calling the discrete time step slots, it's easy to compare the chain growth that you get in a proof of stake setting to this consistency analysis in the proof of work setting. So we can kind of compare directly to the proof of work setting. So this is the proof of work, an analytic prediction of the consistency bound for proof of work. And then this is also our numerical model of the consistency bound for Prowse, which has a difficulty curve that's just a constant. So this is the underlying security kind of scaling law for Prowse. And you can see it closely follows the consistency bound of proof of work, but it's not exactly the same. And it's not exactly the same because of the rate of chain growth being slightly modified by the staking threshold function. So there's a slight discrepancy between the consistency bound and the rates of chain growth that we get in these two settings, which is to be expected. But Prowse was almost designed expressly to follow this consistency bound result as far as it can, as closely as it can. So what does it look like when we have a general difficulty curve and we plot the consistency bound? So that's what we'll look at on the next slide. And now, interestingly, with just a given difficulty curve, none of these parameters are changing along the delay axis, right? It's just the same rate of chain growth across the board here, but the delay is changing along this axis. So what this ends up doing is this consistency bound with the difficulty curve ends up exceeding the proof of work trend at a domain of interest for proof of stake blockchains. And the slope at the origin is kind of zero. It starts at 0 and then kind of tapers off. But we have a region where we're actually underperforming relative to the proof of work trend. So this is a fundamentally kind of different security scaling trade-off. And what we're interested in is being able to make this prediction for a general set of difficulty curves, or any difficulty curve, not just the snowplow curve that we're studying here. And with respect to different difficulty curves, they'll all have different consistency bound results. And the idea is that we can tune a difficulty curve to have a better consistency bound with respect to network delay at about 1 block per delay interval in that domain. And if we have less and less blocks of per delay interval, that means that we're outperforming the security properties of proof of work in that regime of chain growth. So we can slightly improve the chain growth while also attaining better security properties with respect to the delaying adversary launching a covert attack. And this, in turn, is due to the new distribution of time intervals that we get from the staking procedure of Taktikos. So with these rates of chain growth and these consistency bound results, we can kind of understand the probability of settlement violation. And the probability of settlement can be calculated with a simple scaling law. Here we're kind of numerically estimating it, but I'm including this because we're calculating it in the live demo. We're going to be dynamically calculating the probability of settlement violation using this relative forging power model. So this probability that we're looking at, and here it's on a log-based 10 scale, the probability of an adversary winning the double spend attack in the chain growth race is equal to this piecewise function. So you can see it's if we're above this consistency bound of adversarial stake, then the probability is 1. So it's just flat lines. but then we get a definite probability in with respect to the adversarial state when the consistency bound is actually met. So when we're below the consistency bound, there's a finite probability, and when we're above the consistency bound, we're at a probability of 1. And that's what these two domains correspond to. So this kind of piecewise function is defined by the consistency bound, and then the probability of the settlement violation is defined by this scaling law, which is an approximate way of calculating the probability of settlement violation. So with that, we'll kind of summarize what we're looking at for these numerical results. We're interested in network delay, since it alters the time interval distributions and hurts the security of the system. And we want to understand the system in terms of chain growth at its at its essence, and how this chain growth is affected by the delay. Now, the net effect of chain growth, the net effect of delay is to reduce this chain growth for honest participants while helping the adversary and keeping the adversary's rate of chain growth unaffected. This allows us to define consistency bounds, which is a simple inequality between the rates of chain growth of the two participants, the honest participants and the adversary participants. And we can simply model this system because of this property of independent aggregation. We can model it as just a two-party race because we can model all the stake allocated to one account. And it's kind of a simplifying assumption. This defines this domain of security where we have asymptotic guarantees over the consistency of the common prefix blocks of the blockchain. And that's what consistency means. And we can estimate settlement probabilities with respect to the rates of chain growth that we get from this numerical model. Now, estimates of the rate of the covert adversary can give us and allow us to make quantitative predictions about the probability of a block being reorged. And we can also combine this with other models of the rates of forks in delay-induced forks to get the true rate of blockchain forks on the network. So this is kind of, in practical terms, a way of predicting the power of an adversary, but also it gives us sufficient generality to understand the rate of natural delay forks that are induced just by network delay in and of itself without a delaying adversary. So there's kind of a network based delay, and then an adversary delay, which is enhanced by this. The network delay is kind of enhanced by an adversary that's delaying messages between honest participants. So here's the references that I'm referring to. Now, this is the original Ouroboros work, and this is the tight consistency bounds for Bitcoin. And interestingly, these two approaches use similar modeling techniques and with respect to the representation of forks and the representation of time, its discrete intervals. And that's why we're kind of able to make this assessment, able to make this comparison with respect to the consistency bounds. So it's a really tight result, and gives us a simple analytic way of predicting this consistency bound for the proof of work setting. And what we've been able to do here is compare an estimate of chain growth with respect to our proof of stake Taktikos staking procedure, and compare the two protocols directly. So at this point, I'll break for questions, and I'm going to dive in. After that, I'll dive into the numerical model a little bit and show some of the results that we were looking at. Oops. Oh, hello, James.
I'm sorry. I was talking. I was muted this whole time. Hello. It's so good, man. I had an idea though. Sorry, okay. Was that?
Thanks for joining.
Yeah, heck yeah, man, dude, that was so good. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
That plot, that plot with the colors. That was such a good. I'm so happy that it worked out with like a good color scheme because it's such a good plot. I hope we can get people to understand why it's such a good plot. um,
Well, let's dive into it and see if we can.
yeah, man. That's
Oh,
a
we
good
got a
question.
quick question. Listen. What happens if the blockchain goes offline for a long period of time?
Well, I hope it doesn't go offline for more than an epoch.
Yeah, that's a problem.
That's a problem. Assuming that doesn't happen.
Assuming that doesn't happen, there would be a when a blockchain goes offline, man, that's tough. That's catastrophic. I mean, that's like kind of end times.
Yeah. Maybe we can use the maybe you can use the beacons though. Like what if we
Perhaps.
do like if you use the beacons, then you can like extend the time scale. So we can have like you can just say instead of it being like you better have an epoch, it's like you better have a super mega giga epoch. That's
Super
like I feel
epoch.
like that's the best we could ever do though.
Yeah, yeah.
Like at some point it's gotta be forgotten.
Um, well, the thing with probabilistic consensus is it's kind of designed to just chug along, even in the worst case scenario. Because if it forks for a long time, okay, what does offline mean in this context? Offline means no one can connect with each other, and everybody would just forge locally, right? Everybody would just keep using their own resources they have locally to act autonomously and honestly if they're honest participants. And it would just be a big network fork for a sustained period. So that's what I would consider going offline in this probabilistic setting. Though if you're in a BFT setting or some other consensus algorithm where it wasn't designed to continue to operate when it goes offline, that's the thing. There's some protocols where it's designed to just stall and uh, wait for intervention, right?
I kinda like that about probabilistic protocols. It's just like if I don't hear from you, I'm just gonna keep doing my thing.
Kind of, yeah.
And we just hit me up later, man. Just like connect. I hope we agree. One of us is we're gonna have a rough time, but we'll figure it out.
Right. We'll sort it out.
We'll sort it out. Yeah. Maybe I feel like this is a terrible. Do you want to pull up the before we like get BFT protocols feel like more like Karen protocols? They just like put their foot down. They're just like, nope, it's my way or the highway.
Yeah, kind of.
Mm. Um, okay, I had a thought though about the maybe this is why it feels like it's an area argument because you said there was something you said while you were speaking that the as the slots progress, it's just really a ratio of like how much probability do the honest participants have compared to how much probability the adversarial participants have or the adversary has, right?
Yeah.
We can like that's exactly what we're like drawing out with the difficulty curve, right? Because in each slot, we're just taking a threshold, and that's like a total like probability within the hash space, right? So we have a percent, and then we're like accumulating that over like as we go up each time. So we have a like a cumulative probability, and I would maybe it's like the if we go beyond 45 degrees, maybe that's what we found. Like beyond 45 degrees, like you can still keep the triangle that's like um, um, that maintains the like balance, like 50% in the area, the growth of the area as you like pull up the slope. But to do so, like once you cross where like delta is, you I don't know if that makes sense. I don't know.
Hmm.
It feels like there's something to do with that area. When you said it feels like it relates to this like geometric argument that it's envisioned by the difficulty curve. But anyway, I don't want to get it's
Well, we
it's
can we can visualize some of these things, some of these features, and let's go ahead and dive right in. Not sure exactly how to.
I was told once by a technical communicator, he was like, when you start drawing, or when you're doing this with your hands, it means you're like drawing. And apparently I just like to draw in the air, and people can't see the air. They can't see what's in my head. It's so clear though.
So can you see my screen?
Yeah, I'm
right.
gonna like send this inside the screen though.
All right. So we've got this this kind of overlay of the difficulty curve and the stationary distribution, and then the probability density function of the honest chain. And then when I say probability density function, that means the proportion of time intervals that we expect to be on the honest chain if we're observing the honest chain, if we're like an honest observer in the public network. And for simplicity's sake, let's kind of take a look at this setup, right? We've got this snowplow curve. Clearly, we got this kind of ramp shape, and then a cutoff, and then a flat line of lower difficulty curve. And we can change the parameters dynamically, and it'll update. So we can adjust the snowplow curve parameters, and then get different probability density functions for different difficulty curves. So each difficulty curve induces a different probability density function, and the stationary distribution is actually how we're calculating that at any given time, or any given point on this axis.
I'm sorry, Aaron. Before I we're like, when I have us on the screen, we're covering up the variables. So maybe can we just go over what our variables here are, and then I'll put us back on the screen.
Oh, of course. So the variables are this baseline difficulty, this forging amplitude, FA, and then network delay as slot gap, and then gamma. And gamma is the cutoff point. The slot gap is that kind of origin point, that separation between. You can see what the slot gap does.
There you go. Yeah, I don't have like a fancy tool like yours, but so like gamma is the point where this vertical line occurs, right? It's the slot at which that vertical line occurs, right?
Exactly.
And then your what is this? Psi, the gap, the second one, the fourth one is just we don't need to do it 0, but it's just this. Yeah, it's just where does the ramp start in term, right?
Yep.
It's, and then I'm sorry, go ahead.
Typically we've been analyzing it just for simplicity's sake as leaving the slot gap as 0.
Right. And then let's skip over delta for a second. Let's just go and let's talk about FB and FA.
Sure.
So FA then is it's like the tip of the pyramid of the triangle, right?
Exactly.
Tip of the difficulty curve in terms of peak probability. Peak probability.
It's that point that you're most likely to be eligible to make a block relative to the parent block.
And the slope from like the origin, like in this case, like 0, as we've shown it here, the slope from the origin is determined by like rise over run. So it's going to be FA over gamma. Right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then FB is just what is the point? What is the recovery period?
Yeah. What is the difficulty in this recovery phase?
In this region, what is the point of having? What's the point of having FB? Can you just remind us?
So the point of having FB is one, to make the Markov chain representation more numerically tractable, and two, to make sure that if the system goes offline or if there's a big stall in chain growth, that we have some assurance that the system's going to make a block at a rate that's specified by the underlying protocol Ouroboros prowess. So it's like a domain of, it's kind of like a security safeguard, and it also blocks adversaries from extending blockchains that are too far in the past. For instance, they're more inclined to use their eligibilities where you get a lot of eligibilities in this forging window. That's kind of the intuition behind it. So it's this recovery phase state. The Markov chain is actually representing all of these states, but then we can just have a simple Markov chain that represents only forging window states and then one state for the recovery phase. And that's it. That's kind of why we chose it. And it ended up giving decent security properties and just providing a kind of test bed for seeing what the behavior of the forging window really does, and seeing how that affects the security, rather than like worrying about how the distribution effects is affected by any modifications in this recovery phase point. That's not to say we can't design difficulty curves to have other properties, to have other features. And in fact, this simulation, this numerical model works for any difficulty curve. So we're not just restricted to these parameters. We can program any difficulty curve and see what the security properties would be. But to kind of keep this, to keep going here, the block frequency diagram here is comparing several different trends. I know it's a complicated diagram, but recall the chain growth versus network delay plots and the consistency bound plots that we looked at in the presentation. And now we have this intersection point, and this intersection point is changing when we change the chain growth. But no matter how I change the parameters, the consistency bound is always at the halfway point, right? So it's like moving up and down, but it's not moving side to side. Not yet. Now, if we induce a network delay, and here I'll just give it a slight network delay, it starts to move to the right a little bit. And now notice the consistency bound is no longer at 50%. So as soon as we introduce a network delay, it breaks the kind of symmetry between this anti-symmetric trend where this consistency bound is lying. And here we're comparing the numerical result of the numerical result for proof of work chain growth relative to like the same rate of chain growth that we're getting in the proof of stake trend. So this kind of nonlinearity helps guide us. That's kind of why it's plotted alongside. But if this trend is above the linear trend, that means we're exceeding the chain, like rate of chain growth of proof of work, and that means we're like below the chain growth of proof of work. Whereas proof of work has this linear trend with respect to this active, not stake, but computational resources. So
one thing I just want to point out really quick. So unfortunately, like when I put us on screen, our heads just end at the delta. But you can still see the blue between us, right? So you can see the non-zero delta, right? On the right we see the value, so it's 3. So when delta it's 3, right? That's crazy. Like that's a slot of 3. Our gamma is 16. So okay, like I guess it's a fifth. That's 20%. Okay, that's 20% doesn't seem like that unreasonable, right? Like
right.
I don't know. Ethereum and Cardano seem to be pushing 1 almost. Compared to like tens of network seconds, but I don't know. They claim 3 seconds, but whatever. The look, the important part though is that the PDF on the left little plot, the really cool thing, when there's like a chunk taken out of it, like what happened there, right? And that's
right.
Like if I don't know if the middle plot doesn't make sense or it's like weird, right? Then the easiest way to understand it, the way I like the first thing that I understood is that as you increase the delay, the only way the a way that it can be thought of is like the you're expected to see like a flash of light every now and then, right?
Right.
And if you know that or you're expected to get a subscription in the mail every month, but then all of a sudden a global pandemic hits, and you're just like, man, maybe it's not going to happen this month. Maybe it's going to be every 3 months, right? But if we all just kind of like if we understand, we could all just account for it and then slow down the system, right? And slow down to be not expected every month, but every 3 months. But if I continue to expect it every month, and the system can't deal with my like it's slower than that, then I'm gonna like miss out on stuff, right? And the only way I can really like be sure in the sense of what we're really doing here is saying that like, look, to really be sure, we know there's going to be delay in like talking between people. That's just the speed of light. That's like the network latency. So to know how like the comparison between what's adversarial and what's honest, we're just going to take a bite out of the distribution. And that's literally like the security argument for Ouroboros Prowse. They just
Yes.
say, they say along this axis, like literally this plot on the, can we go to the Prowse setting? Can we go to the,
Of course.
like, this is the coolest part. What I love about this tool, guy, everyone, like, I'm so happy there's 7 people here. Like, we can just recreate Ouroboros Prowse. Like, we can just, everything we're talking about, we can just do in Prowse, right? So this blue, I'm going to focus on the blue part in the middle for a second.
Sure.
This is funny, Aaron. I don't think you mentioned the Sybil, like why the Prowse was a little different. But Prowse is a little different because of the Sybil resistance. You want to introduce you want to enforce independent aggregation, and so you have to have a special form of the function that you use. And yeah, you mentioned that it was different, and I was like, oh, maybe he's just not going to brush it under the rug. But then you said the silver or independent aggregation at the end, and I was like, oh, I don't know, maybe I missed it. Maybe I missed it though.
Oh, well, I was talking. I think what I was referring to is the nonlinearity here. You can kind of see it how the blue trend is just exceeding the green trend just a little bit. That's the nonlinearity I was referring to. That's present in Ouroboros Prowse.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we can like oh man, I didn't know this was a stationary distribution. Looks like that's cool. But we can just see here like this is the blue curve is the block time, right? This is what Bitcoin's block time, it's what Ethereum's block time looks like, right? If we have a zero, or can we go to non-zero, or can we go to zero delay? I'm sorry.
Right.
So like at zero delay, it's an exponential, right? It's as close as you can get to like what you should be in Bitcoin. If you had and zero delay means a synchronous network, right? So that's the important part. Like that's the most important part to understand about this is it doesn't matter, like the time scale of the blockchain network is set by the time scale of how fast we can communicate, right? Every doesn't matter, the L2, the L1, the L0, the Polka chain, the Cosmos hub, the internal network, the private network, the machine architecture, the universe, the literal transmission of information within the space-time fabric of our existence has a finite speed. There's a finite speed to the propagation of information, and it's got to be there.
Yep.
So we can account for it. And so we can never be in a synchronous network is all I'm going to say, right? So when we know we can't be in a synchronous network, and this is the best, and this curve we're looking at on the left is literally the best you could ever do in Bitcoin or any proof of work setting without a global clock. Because you could technically, I guess, do it if everyone was honest with the global clock. But how do you enforce they're honest with the global clock? There's no reason to be honest with the global clock.
Right.
So we had to assume on the global clock to do proof of stake. So why not just make it better, because we already assumed a global clock, and then we can get away from the global clock. We can make it global same speed assumption, because we can do Chronos, we can do beacon chains, and it'd be awesome. But this is the best that proof of work could ever do, or Prouse could ever do. Technically, Prouse could ever do. Really close to proof of work. So then, as you the way you prove the security is you just say, I'm gonna take this blue curve on the left, and I'm gonna just draw a line on it as I go to the right. And so for every delay, so in Bitcoin's case, just imagine that global network delay is 20 seconds. So that means there's 3 network delays every 20 seconds. And if there's 3 network delays every 20 seconds, every minute. 3 network delays every minute. So that means there's 60 delays every period for them. That means that they want to go really, 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 really slow compared to network delay, right? That means that they're assuming that they're going to take a huge chunk out of the probability distribution of actually finding a block to really restrict and say, we need to have common prefix amongst everyone, and we're going to wait 60 times the amount of time we think on average it takes to talk to each other before we want another block to appear. They want that much. They want their security that badly. But it's always in terms of the network delay part, right? And so they take a huge chunk, but that's how they prove it, right? They just take a huge chunk, literally this thing. They just compare the areas. They say, this is how much we have, and therefore this is how much the adversary has, because in a proof of stake network or in a proof of work network, the adversary and the honest scale together like this. I'm going somewhere that maybe that's not the right thing to say. Maybe I should take that back. I sometimes say that I don't actually mean, but
they scale together in this way because we're interested in these domains of security properties of the assurances that the protocol can give us.
Yeah. And then, sorry, go, please, my bad.
Well, yeah, and then I wanted to point out that I'm also tracing out this consistency bound on the, let's see, the adversarial stake axis for the log base 10 of the probability of settlement violations. And here I just set it at K equals 10 blocks, so we can get a calculation. But 10 blocks is kind of the standard settlement depth. I think on Ethereum, people wait 30 blocks. So you could increase the depth of blocks to have tighter assurances over the blockchain not reordering that block out. So wait till your block is 30 blocks deep or 10 blocks deep. That's what this case depth means. That's the idea. But you can see that this asymmetry is also reflected in the numerical estimate that we're getting. And if we increase the delay further, that consistency bound goes down and down and down. Right. And then our probabilities of settlement violations increase with respect to delay. So that's just the scaling I wanted to kind of point out as we change the delay. But now let's go back. I'll set the delay back to 0, and then we'll set gamma again to a non-zero value. So notice previously we had Prouse, we had an exponential distribution, just had kind of a decaying tail. And here we have this profile that is very prominent and kind of characteristic, and it's a feature. It's something that no one else is talking about. And it's really cool. And there's an analytic formula for it. And it's induced by this shape, this ramp. And there's really not many other shapes that we can induce. And then this shape just happens to have this profile that has a better kind of scaling trend with respect to this consistency bound. And we can increase the delay and kind of see that the bytes that we're taking out of this distribution are just not as significant as they were for the it's kind of the area under the curve is less with respect to the delay at the origin. And that's why it has this kind of improved scaling with respect to network delay. It's this shape of this profile, and really not much else. It's just this probability density function has a shape that's more
amenable to like mapping onto natural, like the latency natural to communication networks.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess it's as easy as that.
And then what can we do? Just naively like set the slot gap right to the network delay, and we get different consistency bounds. Notice that as long as the slot gap is higher than the network delay, we're back at the 50% consistency bound. But if slot gap's less than network delay, then consistency bound is modified. So but even inducing a delay on both parties, like forcing a delay a little bit, it's akin to that. Anyway, you're going to say something?
I was saying, I just want to acknowledge that like the delay also just means that that's a quiet period for everyone. Like no one's allowed to talk in that time.
Yes.
Like it's, which is not bad, because no one's allowed to become eligible in that time. No one's allowed to gossip, right? It's basically just a gossip time, like a round essentially.
Right.
But it does cap your overall density in the network.
And I also wanted to share this plot, which is kind of the surface of these two trends extruded out along the delay axis. And this is numerically kind of representing, it's a little low resolution due to I wanted this to be performant and kind of live. So the consistency bound plots are showing the intersection between these two surfaces, and that's it. And then we're just kind of rescaling the delay axis with respect to the chain growth of the system. But you can see that we get this kind of trend with respect to the delay. As we're modifying the delay, it's as if we're tracing this point as I'm moving this slider, and that's what this numerically is actually doing. So it does this parameter sweep and gets this consistency bound. And the important bit is that at the origin point, we have this slope being 0. And it has this kind of plateau that you can see. I'll increase the slot gap to show what it does. Slot gap kind of imposes this plateau, and then it drops off. So as you can see, it kind of also fundamentally changes to the scaling law, scaling of the consistency bound relative to the scaling law that's given by the proof of work analysis.
And just to be clear, I just want to point out that if you could enforce a sort of gap in a proof of work setting, it would move like this. It's just we're saying that we're assuming that is not possible. So in a pure like proof of work setting, like a pure coin flip kind of game, you could delay in the proof of stake by agreeing to delay, and whereas in a proof of work, it's always going to be a race. So sorry, I just want to
correct.
But,
yeah. Okay. So that's the numerical model. At this point, we might want to check for questions.
Do you want to show, like, maybe, I know, I mean, I don't want to keep anyone too long, but do you want to set up set up a situation and press for the grinding? Do you want to talk about the grinding, or you just want to leave that?
That's right. The grinding, right. So the whole premise behind this numerical tool was you can tune this to kind of bulk security properties, and then what we want to get out of this is the fine grain security properties that are given by the grinding frequency. And since we've seen from our simulations that the frequency is close to the grinding frequency, what we can do is tune the parameters in a way to get, nice parameters that are more reasonable, like this. We can tune it relative to the expected delay to get a set of parameters that we like, and then calculate the grinding frequency. And this will take a second to calculate, but it updates this curve to actually give the grinding frequency, and we can see what the grinding frequency is relative to the covert strategy.
Can you remind us what the different, like what the, so the honest, I remember, is the, as for some given stake, so say like 20% stake for the honest participants, for this given delay, right? 20% or 80% owned by honest, 20% owned by adversarial. That would mean that the honest participants are able to make a chain at like, you know, zero 0.1 blocks per delay, while the adversaries are stuck making a chain at like, 0.02 per delay or something like that, right?
Right. I think is that you're talking about.
I'm saying so at a given like just at a pure race, from pure race point of view.
Yeah.
Like because it's symmetric on this, so I should be able to flip it and say when I have 0.8 and in a synchronous network, or I'm sorry, in this. Oh, you're right. It's not the same. Yeah, it's not quite the same. I was trying to read from the top and then go from and say subtract. I was trying to just like flip the zeros. That's what I was trying to do.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, whatever. Let's focus on the intersection point. Just can you explain the difference between the covert and the grind? What's the strategy?
So the covert strategy is just let's give an adversary the amount of stake that the honest participants don't have, and then model it as if it's just a race between the two parties,
just following the rules.
They're both just following the same rules. Thing. Yeah, except the honest participants have this network delay that's induced, and well, that's it. That's the covert line versus the honest line. But for the grinding line, it's like we said previously, we expect the grinding frequency to be close to this predicted covert line. But the grinding frequency is enhanced a little bit. It's a little bit higher than the covert line. And it corresponds to an adversary that's testing every eligibility that it has locally, and then testing every slot and parent slot pair that it has locally in its private reserve of eligibilities. And when I say eligibilities, that means, the adversary has a nonce and this slot and some amount of stake that it can use with that account to check and allocate an eligibility for that round. So the eligibility consists of the cryptographic proof, the nonce of the VRF lottery, and pairs of them in this context. And that's what the grinding activity corresponds to. And what's going on now is that the simulation is executing a Monte Carlo simulation in the background, one by one, going on this axis and getting the frequency, populating them all. So what we'll see in a second is this trend will update with a dotted line and it'll modify the consistency bound.
So it's basically, or for a call, it's basically as a function of delay, we can kind of think of that middle, the 3D plot, the surface plot we saw a second ago. Delay is kind of coming in and out of the board at us, right?
Yeah.
And that's why you're saying like follow the intersection of the curves, and that's why we get that's where we're able to trace out the consistency bound, that green curve compared to proof of work, right?
Right.
And so for this automata simulate, so what we did here was we had the Markov simulation, but I believe you coupled it to the automata simulation, which is doing the Monte Carlo automata. They're like picking a set of nonces and just doing a number of those sorts of trials to gather metrics,
right?
Chain growth, like micro state chain growth, and so it's a way of, or so what we're really wanting to do is know, like, if the adversary, when we say an adversary is doing following the same strategy as the honest participants, what we mean is that if you call from the automata model, that or I don't know if we really talked about the automata model a lot, but what we found is that this branching model, we have introduced that. We've spoken that that's like a microstate model, right? That's like the local thought. And so the key point between the honest and adversary difference is that the honest participants move on the first eligibility, right? They always, as soon as they're eligible to do something, they use it, they do it, right? And that picks out a single unique path through, or like should, if you assume honest majority, or assume random, like honest random election, that would pick out a unique path.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Which is the whole point that we're trying to do. I think that's a reasonable way to say it. But the adversary is like remembering old information and then trying to use the curve, that green curve, to like promote themselves. This idea of, if you recall back, this idea of like pseudo predictability. So you're able to like modify a little bit, right? And that's exactly what those little modifications compared to like the type of grinding you're able to do in Prouse, which this grinding is different than that. It's the grinding you get by like remembering stuff in the past, and it's this depth argument. But here we're basically saying like this is the limit of it. It doesn't really. It was 49. The consistency bound was 49% before.
Yeah, and now
Right?
it's slightly modified. Yeah, it's been modified to 0.46, and you can see we've got network delay, we've got grinding simultaneously, and we're still just calculating the intersection point between two trends. But this trend was calculated with a different means. This is the simulation result, right? The dotted line. And the reason we can't like adaptively or do it in the live demo, well, we just did it in the live demo, but it took a minute to calculate. So the idea is that we can use this kind of coarse-grained covert strategy analysis that we can quickly come up with numerical results and then get the fine-grained security by running the simulation with this grinding frequency. And that's about it. This is kind of all the ingredients to this puzzle that we've put together, and it's a lot of information in one kind of console or one heads-up display, or however you want to call this. But it's a full picture of the security properties of Taktikos, and kind of the culmination of a lot of reasoning and kind of insights that I've come up with my colleagues, and I'm really appreciative of all of the help I've gotten along the way. So are there any other comments in the stream? Are we good?
Yeah, we do have a question.
Cool. Oh, okay.
When planning for network delay, should you account for the worst expected internet connection, the average, the best connection?
Yes.
I will say this is a bit of an opinionated question. I think there's probably a technical optimum, but in general, probably the more money you throw at it, the better it's going to get. So I think you have to make a decision around where you want to draw a line. So I'm curious what your thoughts are, Aaron.
I would say that it's more of an averaging, and it also has to account for just times when network throughput is going to be unreliable naturally, I think. So you kind of have to accommodate those times when they crop up unexpectedly. So yeah, I would say, but also we're in the probabilistic setting. So if there's catastrophic network delays, we have some guarantee of the system recovering and healing itself. So we're in this paradigm of self-healing protocols that can even tolerate adversarial spikes of dominance. So with that, I would say it's more like we can plan for the average in this context. I would feel pretty confident with that.
Yeah, honestly, I feel like like to account for, hard to say. Like what would you prioritize for? Like that's very hard to say. But if I'm going to prioritize for anything, I think it's reasonable to say that we should prioritize for the widest like reach or like the greatest participation possible, right? Because that's like fundamentally how we can have the greatest amount of security. Because
without
we
leaving
all,
like without leaving throughput on the table.
I mean, yeah. So yeah, if we can have the, yeah, exactly, right. So because you can make something that reaches everyone, but it doesn't, like it's a
It
I
goes so
guess,
slow that no one can
yeah,
use
exactly.
it.
The air technically, like the sun's warmth reaches everyone every day, but it takes 24 hours.
Yeah.
um, we wouldn't want like to do a blockchain protocol that way. Um, but yeah, the trying to go fast but be secure is a very difficult problem. And so uh, I think trying to optimize or like prioritize, honestly prioritize like just just adoption with whatever level of throughput you need, like whatever guarantees you need within your system, just try to get the widest buy-in there, right? And then I think Taktikos, if not like of any protocol I've ever seen, actually allows that, because you can just scale the block time or the block size relative to the network delay, which is something that people have been trying to do for going on 13 years now, it seems. Or I don't know if it's 13 years, but I've been around that long, so I'm willing to be wrong there. But um, yeah, it just seems that I think you should do it for the average. You should for something like a blockchain protocol. You definitely need to, or something like a ledger consensus where you are trying to secure an economy. I think or economies or just apps, applications, protocols. The people who are interested need to buy in, and everything is predicated on what they're willing to. The resources at the disposal of the protocols, I think, should be, or to large extents, are usually, um, whether they should be or not is a different question. Usually predicated by the resources at the disposal of the people who care about that thing. So I care about making this one equitable, though. I think Aaron does too.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sean. That was a good question, though. I think Sean does too. He's been like those type protocols are just like, hey, don't you tell me what to do. I'll ask you what to do, and then you suggest to me, and I'll decide if I'm going to follow your suggestion. I think it's a really good way to describe it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anything else you want to like wrap up with there?
No. Thanks for watching, everyone. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to share all this with. This is kind of the last plan talk, but I have more to show as far as Taktikos goes. So I'll probably be doing this again pretty soon in the future. And yeah, that kind of wraps up this live stream. Thanks, folks.
Yeah, thank you guys. Where are these things? Here we go. So we got to do. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, no, this is the old one. They're gonna be okay. We're going with it because it's already up. So thank you guys. Thanks everyone for watching. If you want to find us on Twitter, you can find us at there, or Instagram, or GitHub, or LinkedIn. We do still have some job openings available if you really want to come work and chat about these awesome, really cool things. Don't listen to Sean. He's not just here to make money for block reviews. That's not true. We're here to we got to spread the wealth we got to make everyone, everyone can be a block producer. Everyone can be we're going to make everyone a transaction producer, an asset producer. We're going to make so many producers. We just got to make producers. We just help us build producers, and producers can help us can produce builders. Maybe that we can just do that. We can just all help one another. I'd like that. If you want to help, you can go to topple.co and find more information about us. There you go. I'm really sorry that this is actually the thing that we should have been showing the whole time, and I didn't know which one it was. So if you really want the links, linktree linktr.ee/Topple protocol. You can find us a lot of our links there, or find us on Discord and Twitter, and like I said, GitHub, all these places. So thank you all again. Thank you, Aaron, for a really great talk. I really, really enjoyed it. And I think we'll talk to y'all later. Bye, everyone.